Hi, I'm Sandeep, and you're watching the Indian Weekender. In today's big news, as you all are aware, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has dismissed a minister from government, Minister Iain Lees-Galloway. And as we all know, that he was holding a number of portfolios from ACC, workplace safety, workplace relations, and immigration. So, Prime Minister has dismissed former Minister Iain Lees-Galloway on the charges of inappropriate behaviour at his workplace, and according to Prime Minister, now his position had become untenable. So, well, that is not the focus of today's conversation. We are going to speak to a noted immigration lawyer, Alastair McClymont, to understand how his tenure at immigration ministry has affected the broader migrant community. So welcome to our Zoom studio today. Alastair, how are you today?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you for having me again today. And very excited to talk about the legacy of the ex-immigration minister, Iain Lees-Galloway, and the irony of the fact that the Minister of Place Relations is required for having inappropriate place relations.
Surely. Well, I do understand, and probably I do understand there would be a temptation for all of us to kind of comment on that inappropriate behavior part. But for the benefit of our audiences and benefit of the conversation that we want to have, we might want to park that issue aside and let's focus more on the issue that matters to the broader migrant community, which is issues around immigration. So if I have to ask you to start this conversation, that if you have to rate Minister of Immigration's performance as the minister of this hugely important portfolio in the last, I would say now 3 years, because we are just 8 weeks before the next elections. So how would you rate the minister performance?
Well, I've lost count of how many immigration ministers I've been working under, as an immigration lawyer, having done this for almost 25 years. But by far, this is the most disaster-ridden tenure of an immigration minister that I've ever experienced in those 25 years of doing this job. It's just been one disaster after another. And I don't think that a minister can take all of the blame for that. I think part of it is to do with the immigration policies that this government has been trying to implement, and also due to his inexperience as a
Sure, definitely, and we will speak more about that. And I think probably in a number of other private conversation, a lot of industry stakeholders, they were having this kind of opinion. But after today's dismissal, probably we are seeing the eruption of that kind of opinion, including yours. And coming back to important thing that for the last 2.5 years, probably we have seen Prime Minister Ardern and her cabinet defending immigration minister in the thick and thin of all the immigration chaos that this country has been facing. So that is kind of irony, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think part of that is the fact that Iain Lees-Galloway really wanted this portfolio for the election. There's really nobody else who's going to take this portfolio. And also, the Labour government was a two-party opposition for 9 years. So very few people in that Labour Party had any experience ever. So, you had a very inexperienced minister. There was an ideological foundation that the Labour Party had in taking over the government 3 years ago. And I think that the minister was the personality type he was inexperienced. He was quite naive and very easily manipulated by a ministry, Immigration New Zealand, which was already in a state of chaos before he inherited it. And when you have a ministry which is already in a state of chaos, you need a minister to take control, to bang heads together, and to insist on change. But he wasn't the man for the job because he was so easily manipulated by his ministry officials, which I think is really why we simply had one disaster after another right from day one.
Sure. Now, let's move on and talk more about those issues that you were talking about as disaster. I think Kiwi Indian community has its own twist because we have been seeing and coming across thousands and thousands of people whose applications initially for partnership visas were being declined, arbitrarily rejected, and then they have to go back into processing queue. Indian marriages were under the radar for, again, coming out from Immigration New Zealand's bureaucratic decision making. And then we have got the issue of skilled migrant category visas. Applications are pending probably around for more than 2 years. So if I have to ask you, like, what were the most critical issues in your view in the last 2.5 years under this immigration minister, what would those issues be?
I think they, when this government came into power 3 years ago, they had a program that they wanted to implement, and that was based on an ideological foundation. Their belief was that migrants are stealing New Zealand jobs. And their second ideological foundation was that if they forced employers to pay migrants a lot more money, then everybody would be paid a lot more money and everybody would be well off. So based on that, this government tried to implement a number of policies and a number of changes to policies which basically considered lower skilled migrants as offering no value whatsoever to the country. So everything that they did from then on was based on this idea of not wanting these type of people in the country. And if you see everything that's happened in terms of the delays in skilled migrant applications, the changes to work visa applications, their reluctance to allow people stuck overseas to come back in, the partnership visas that were stopped, the targeting of, in particular, Indian students who were on graduate visas. All of this comes down to that basic foundation where they believe that a lot of the migrants coming into the country, primarily as students who are now working and on pathways to residency, this government did not want those people in the country. So they looked for a number of ways to try and get rid of the people, but at the same time, continue to bring students into the country to pay money to keep the educational institutes alive. And that really sort of forms the foundation of this government's immigration policies. We want the money, but we don't want the people. And rather than come up with some innovative and transformative policy to better target the migrants the country needed, they simply just tried to get rid of all the people who had already been invited to this country to work and study. So, I mean, it was really a disaster from day one because of that basic ideological foundation.
Sure. Now, coming and understanding more about this ideology that you have said, where they kind of don't value people who are working on low skill or maybe earning low salaries. But as you point out, that probably that's not the right thing. So my question to you is that was the industry stakeholders, the businesses, employers, were they not relaying back it to Labour Party or the government or the immigration minister in particular, that that's not the case?
Well, they were, but I mean, I've seen the list of business leaders who asked for and had meetings with the minister. I've heard about these meetings that they've had with the minister, and my impression is that the information and the pleas given by industry and businesses around the country to the minister were wholly ignored, primarily because of this ideological foundation that the Labour Party and New Zealand Party, they both share the same ideological foundation that forms the basis of their immigration policy, which is really part of their economic policy, which is that migrants compete with New Zealanders for jobs, which of course is really a myth. It doesn't really exist because research around the world shows that that's actually not the case. But
Sure.
that's what appeals to voters. It's the perception that migrants steal jobs, which is really not the case, but that's where their voter base is, and that sort of overrid everything that business was telling them.
Sure. And everything that you have talked about, this is basically about a pre-COVID world, isn't it? When the unemployment rate was as low as 4%. At that time as well, probably Immigration New Zealand was pursuing this stance. So that's not an accurate representation, isn't it?
They have been doing for the previous 2 years is no different from what they're doing now. I mean, even then, pre-COVID, we had one of the lowest unemployment rates that New Zealand's seen for decades. You know, we were down to 4%, but for some reason, the Labour Party and New Zealand First still believe that 4% unemployed were competing with migrants for jobs, which everybody knows is not a fact. And now that we've had the COVID-19 and the unemployment rate is likely to go up to something like perhaps 8%, they're even more adamant that migrants compete with New Zealanders' jobs, which I just simply do not believe is the case. And you'll find that most economists around the world will not agree is the case, because, for example, under the previous national government, we had a real economic boom, but that happened at the same time that we had our highest net migration rates for decades. So the number of migrants coming into the country were not stealing jobs of New Zealanders; they were actually entering into an alternative labour market, and they were creating economic activity, creating new businesses, and creating jobs. But that's not the Labour Party ideology.
Right. Okay. So what do you expect now that with this sudden departure of Minister and Chris Fafoy coming and joining as a new immigration minister, do you expect or anticipate that there would be some serious thought given to the failures in the immigration department previously, and would there be a turnaround that our temporary migrants and migrants can expect in the near future?
None whatsoever. Everything will be exactly the same. I mean, you've got the same problem. You've got a minister who really doesn't know anything about immigration. You've got a minister who's relatively inexperienced, and you've got that same fundamental ideological foundation which forms the basis of all immigration policy. So I see no reason whatsoever why anything will be any different.
Well, I do understand your point, and you have repeatedly made point about the ideological thing. But just to being fair to the minister and to the government, when we are looking at immigration ministry, there is always two aspects. One is ideological aspect that you are telling, but other is an administrative or say bureaucratic aspect. So what we have found out, and correct me if I'm wrong, that previous minister, Mr. Lees-Galloway, was kind of wanting in that administrative space as well, particularly, say, in Indian marriages coming under the rubber and the issuance of a new cultural marriage visa. That basically exposed that probably minister did not have a very clear understanding of that. So do you expect the new incoming minister, we can expect at least some changes in terms of bureaucratic efficiency or administrative competency?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with Iain Lees-Galloway is he just simply did not understand the immigration space. And, being an MP in Palmerston North, being sort of Pākehā, maybe he just didn't really have any exposure to the immigration world. So when Immigration New Zealand would send him briefings, trying to explain what's going on, he seemed to just buy that completely, 100% without question. Whereas maybe an immigration minister who had some background or knowledge of immigration, maybe through their own constituents or through their own community, might have a better understanding of how the immigration space actually works. So, having said that, yeah, maybe Chris Fafoy does have a better understanding of it. He's from an electorate where there is a higher migrant population, extended family and community. Maybe there's a better understanding of immigration issues. So he may be able to be better at picking up the facts of when he's being lied to by his ministry. And as I say, the last 3 years, there are plenty of examples of where the ministry officials have clearly misled the minister, and the minister has been incapable of detecting when he's being lied to, because he just simply doesn't understand how immigration works.
Yeah, of course. And just not about being lied, I would say that a lot of bureaucratic arbitrariness of Immigration New Zealand has put the minister and the government on the dock, especially I would say the delays emanating from Immigration New Zealand's Mumbai office, and then the Visa Park 401 changes that were I would say arbitrarily introduced in around May 2019, that probably changed the whole scenario of partnership visa. And at that time, we have seen former minister quite naively believing in all the explanations being given to him by his bureaucrats. And he was kind of giving or relaying that naive explanation to the people, member public, and to media as well, and expecting us to believe in that.
As you discovered, Sandeep, through your own Official Information Act requests, the minister was putting pressure on Mumbai to clear the backlog, operations manager in Mumbai decided to clear the backlog by declining all the partnership visas. So rather than a minister pulling in his officials and saying, what the hell is going on here, get rid of this person, he instead created this completely bogus rubbish policy, which I haven't seen any examples of the policy being used, and then standing there in front of the TV camera saying, I've fixed the problem. I mean, it was bullshit. He didn't fix the problem because the same operations manager who caused the problem in the first place is still there and still in the same position. So it clearly shows that he does not have control over his ministry, and that the ministry officials are basically free to do whatever they like to keep their processing within budget and to achieve whatever aims they have, regardless of what the government tells them. That shows to me it's a ship without a captain.
Now, thanks, Alastair, for reminding me about that inefficiency thing that we actually were able to figure out after going through Official Information Act and getting that information, where it was categorically proven that INZ's Mumbai office, actually, they were acting on their own, and they actually decided to summarily reject application. And yes, you're quite right that probably Minister was naive again to figure out and impose an oversight. Basically, what my point is that sometime when a minister is joining or taking over a ministry, you don't expect him to be an expert of subject matter. But what you do expect from him is to provide ministerial oversight, to ask right questions, and to demand right answers, isn't it? And in that sense, probably, yeah.
Right. I mean, you cannot expect an immigration minister to have, a lot of experience in the immigration field, because it's not a big ministry. But what he should have done right at the beginning is that rather than rely solely 100% on what his officials are telling him, he should have got information from lots of different sources. And then when his officials told him something, he should have asked questions. And the whole Carol Schubeck disaster is an example of his failure to ask questions. Now, when this government came in, I volunteered to talk to the minister or other MPs and to give them information about what was happening in the immigration field. They didn't want to know about it. They just did not want to know. So he relied solely on what his ministry officials were telling him.
Right.
I got copies of the reports that were sent by the ministry to the minister, and they were clearly misrepresenting the situation. They were misleading him, and they were getting him to agree on things which were clearly going to be a problem later on. And there were a problem later on, such as the targeting of Indian visa holders for deportation and compliance action. But the minister was too naive to realize that that's what the Immigration New Zealand officials were doing. And you saw that within the first year, he got accused of ministry officials having racist policies by targeting particular ethnic groups for deportation, because he was too naive to understand that that's what the immigration officials were doing.
No, you are quite right. And I just adding on what you were saying, that to be fair to him as well, we need to acknowledge from what he was trying to do. Like, he was definitely reaching out to ethnic communities, including Kiwi Indian communities. And we have seen him going out and talking to community, and they're meeting to some selected members of community and some selected leaders over there. And we are told that probably those members of community from within their own party and beyond, they were trying to relay him back about where exactly the problem is. And that kind of information, I'm not sure how authentic that information was. So again, it raises question mark, like, was he contacting and talking to the right people within the community? Was he getting the right kind of information? Or was he competent enough to get the right kind of information, process it nicely, and then go back and talk to his bureaucrats?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very easy to go and talk to members of the community, but members of the community don't always have a detailed understanding of the intricacies of how Immigration New Zealand operates and how the policies actually work. They have a pretty detailed knowledge of the mechanics of the immigration system.
Sure.
The minister wasn't those people.
Yes. Selected. And I would say not, surely, and not always community leaders as well. Like, this is something that probably we will have to accept it and tell everyone as well that probably he was trying to reach out to be seen that he's doing something with some selected people within from their own party in that community space. But again, they were, I would say, dare I say, that they were not the right representative, not relaying the right problems. So when I'm saying that, probably in terms of when we hit the roadblock in terms of cultural marriages, cultural Indian marriages in the cultural sense, at that time probably we have experienced there was complete chaos. He was relying on information from some sources, and the kind of information that his ministry or he was getting, like we have figured it out from our own experience, that were not accurate interpretation of Indian marriages, Indian cultural marriages, how it happens, and what kind of documentation can be produced for the visa purpose. So
yeah, I mean,
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're right. Because, like, for example, an Indian community leader can go and talk about culturally arranged marriages generally, but how would that community leader be able to explain to the minister how current immigration policy being applied is working against those who are in culturally arranged marriages? Because if that community leader doesn't have a very detailed and intricate knowledge of how immigration policies actually operate, then actually what's the point in talking to someone about what a culturally arranged marriage looks like? It's because it's the way that the policy is designed and the way that the policy is implemented, which is really the problem. So, community leaders talking about the importance of culturally arranged marriages really doesn't actually help very much, because you still have the same policymakers creating and implementing the same rubbish policies that we're stuck with.
Definitely. And I would say that it's an irony in a way that the current government, it relies heavily on experts, as we know, from other areas of policy making, including how we have managed our COVID pandemic, the global pandemic. So within that government, we have got a minister over here, probably who was not relying on experts, on right media organizations to get the right kind of feedback. And probably that led to his the chaos that we have seen in this immigration department in last 2 years, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And, as I said before, I've seen a lot of the briefing papers from Immigration New Zealand, and, I will read something in one of those briefing papers. I know what Immigration New Zealand's talking about, but other people are not going to know what they're talking about, because you've really got to have that understanding of the immigration policy. I mean, the thing that really surprised me was very early on, Immigration New Zealand told the minister that their deportation action was targeted, what I clearly identified as being people who had come into New Zealand as students from India. Yet the minister failed to pick that up and didn't really realise that was happening. He signed off the document and said, yeah, that's fine. And then about 6 months later, it came out that Immigration New Zealand were actually racially profiling Indians and other ethnicities. But the minister was completely unaware of it, because he was so naive, and he couldn't pick up the language in the ministry briefings because he just didn't have the experience. And his failure to pick up a telephone and actually ask somebody, well, what do you think this means? And maybe that's some sort of arrogance about that. But, as I said, I'd personally offered to help and to sort of give information and to do whatever I could. But once he was elected, he didn't want to know about it.
Yeah, we completely agree with that, and we have seen on the ground. Now, coming back to, I would say the new minister is coming in, and we don't want to talk. I think we need to give him a fair chance before he actually get hold of this very important ministry, which, dare I say, is plagued with a lot of scandals and incompetency and failures. Probably there is an uphill task ahead of him, isn't it?
Well, I mean, he's only got, 2 months? He's really not going to be doing anything for 2 months, really.
Right, okay.
And then we're going to have to look at how the new government is formed. And as we know, Winston Peters has said that as a bottom line for a coalition agreement, New Zealand First will provide the immigration minister. That will be the single biggest disaster that will hit this country for a generation. If New Zealand First are going to put in one of their MPs as an immigration minister, they want to cut immigration numbers down to 15,000 a year. That would be a complete disaster for New Zealand. So, it's very critical times coming ahead.
It is very critical time. Well, I'm tempted to make an observation, though a little bit unrelated. My observation is that probably Winston Peters, being in government for last 3 years, probably he had mellowed a bit, because from what I recall, in 2017, probably he was campaigning on a number of 10,000 migrants. So now, after being in government for 3 years, he probably is, he might have realized that it's not that easy to check off all migrant workers out of the in Pacific Ocean. And so probably he has increased his number by 50%. But again, that's a bit unrelated. So coming back and talking about elections and then the new government, we are talking about a post-COVID world. So in your view, how in this post-COVID world, immigration is going to be affected?
Well, I mean, as I said, that goes down to those ideological foundations about this belief that migrants steal the jobs from locals. And we have an unemployment rate which might double. So you're going to have that fundamental premise that we now need less migrants because there are more unemployed New Zealanders. And I think you're going to find that that's going to form the policy of not only the Labour Party, New Zealand First Party, but the National Party as well. And, possibly even the Green Party. We don't know. So, it's very difficult to get an alternative point of view in there. And as I said earlier, it's not a point of view that I agree with, because I simply don't believe that migrants steal the jobs from New Zealanders. I believe you have a parallel labour market, and that the more migration you have, the more economic activity you have, and the more job creation you have. But I'm very much a lone voice on that. So
yeah, sure, no, definitely. We would. I think probably National in their last term, they were kind of following this policy, isn't it? Like which a lot of people, including Labour and New Zealand First, have criticized, that they were trying to boost economy on the basis of migration.
Yeah, well, that's true. But they were doing it by stealth, by bringing in cheaper labour through export education industry, by bringing in large numbers of students. And the purpose was not really to, to educate these people so that they can go back to their home country for qualification. One of the main purposes of that was a cheap pool of labour who did not have a pathway to residency. So it was a high level of government-led exploitation of migrant workers under the guise of an export education industry. And that hasn't really changed under the Labour-led government, apart from Labour saying, actually, we don't want these people at all. We don't actually want your money. We don't want your work. We actually don't want you. So get the hell out of here. So that's really the only difference. Both governments still believe in bringing in students as a cheap form of labour.
Now, again, that is a question for future, I'm sure. Probably based on what you have to say, probably we need another show to speak and understand your alternative, parallel point of view on immigration, which we will do certainly. But coming back to the problems that our temporary migrants are facing today, here and now, if I have to say, to broadly categorize, what will be the three immediate priority that the new minister, Chris Fafoy, should be looking into at and acting quickly and decisively?
Well, let's imagine that it's going to be a Labour-led government and there's going to be no New Zealand First, and that Chris Fafoy keeps the immigration portfolio for the next 3 years. Okay, so I mean, really, there's a lot of immigration programs which have already commenced. We're talking about the accreditation program for employers. I mean, that's going to continue. But I think their priorities has to be the skilled migrant application category. And as soon as they can get rid of New Zealand First, they really need to look at overhauling that, because their use of the ANSCO document to determine skill level is fundamentally flawed. They need to do something about the huge backlog of skilled migrant applications. They can't just simply do nothing and wait for these people to get sick of it and pack up and go home. They really need to solve that problem as a priority. And I think the entrepreneur business category is a complete and total unmitigated disaster, which then needs some focus, because we need to be inviting business people to invest money in this country. And at the moment, the entrepreneur policy is doing the exact opposite. It is encouraging overseas entrepreneurs and business people to take their money elsewhere and not bring it to New Zealand, because the policy is such an unmitigated disaster. So I think those really need to be the priorities.
Sure. And from what I've heard that you are envisaging, this is going to be the next government post September 2020. So you don't see any hope in the next probably 8 weeks? Do you expect that incoming minister could possibly act on the new immigration emergency powers that former immigration minister has got under the COVID-19 Response Act, the amendment that we have seen during the lockdown. So do you envisage that he might be acting on those powers decisively to help a lot of temporary migrant workers who are currently stranded overseas?
No, I wouldn't think so at all. I think eight weeks until the election, I think is just going to be treading water and just waiting to see what's going to happen. I don't believe that the failure of the minister to use those powers was a personal failing of Iain Lees-Galloway. I think it was something which is driven primarily by the ministry themselves, the advice that they were given based on the overall policy foundations of this government. And that the minister did not want to be seen to be bringing in people on work visas coming up to the election, because this government and the Labour Party and the New Zealand First partners wanted to push the fact that they were protecting job opportunities for New Zealanders, and they didn't want anything to adversely influence that prior to the election. And I'm sure that Chris Farfoy will be under exactly the same instructions from his leader, and I just think it's going to be business as usual.
Well, that's not a good news, I would say. And before I let you go, any hope for probably tens of thousands of people, temporary migrant workers who are already on shore and currently in the queue for skilled migrant category? Do you envisage any hope for them in the next 8 weeks of period?
Well, I think that, for the people who are on partnership visas, who are stuck overseas, I think their time will come and they will get the opportunity to come in soon. I think the people who are on essential skills work visas or open graduate visas and the people who are stuck in the skilled migrant queue, I don't think much is going to change under a Labour-led government, because I think that those problems can go back to those ideological foundations of the Labour Party in terms of wanting to protect job opportunities for New Zealanders, and their belief that those people somehow paid under $25.50 an hour have absolutely nothing to offer to this country and are of no value to this country, which is what their fundamental belief is. And unless we get a change of government who believes that these migrant workers do contribute something to our society, then I don't think we're going to see any changes.
Great. I would say thanks for your time today. Thanks for your valuable views. I know that probably you are quite keen to discuss more about your alternative view on immigration, which we certainly would speak.
I would love to, Sandeep. I've got an alternative immigration policy that I would love to push.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Today we are just doing a promotion of your alternative immigration policy, and then probably, we will again find some time to discuss so that we can throw in some more ideas in this election contest, which we understand is going to be hotly contested. But immigration issues, they are very dear to us, for our community. Temporary migrants who are in the queue and whose life has been temporarily suspended, we wish them all the best, and we want to bring some good news to them, and we will continue to raise the voice with the government, with the authorities, and debate as well, so that we can enrich this public debate. So thanks for your time today, Alastair. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandeep. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.